Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Amos, the second chapter, and pretty much continuing from where we left off in the first chapter, as we see Amos begin to pronounce judgment, right, at the word of the Lord against these neighboring nations, right, the nations that, the Syrians, right, Tyre, Zidon, the Ammonites, the Edomites, Philistines, and so on. And so in the second chapter here, we see that Amos continues to pronounce judgment against these nations and really now starts to focus on Judah and Israel. Okay. So just keeping in mind that at this point in time, you have the both the northern and southern kingdom. It's the divided kingdom, though both of them are still in the land, right? So this is prior to the Assyrians coming in and besieging Samaria and then ultimately carrying off the bulk of the northern kingdom, into captivity there. So this is the book of Amos, chapter 2, verse 1. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Now, this account here of Moab burning the bones of the king of Edom into lime, you can't, there isn't really an actual direct account, specifically of this. All right. However, it might be one of those events or situations that did happen, around that time, right? I'm sure Amos was referring to something along those lines over here, in which this could have really angered the Lord, right? In terms of being an abominable thing to do. Okay. Amongst the many other things that the Moabites did, right? As it mentions here, 3 transgressions and for 4, right? You hit your limit and went over it. And then it lists one of those things on here. Verse 2, but I will send a fire upon Moab, and it shall devour the palaces of Kerioth. And Moab shall die with tumult, with shouting, and with the sound of the trumpet. Now, once again, the fire being sent, right, upon Moab or upon these different nations, it doesn't mean that the Lord is going to have, fire come down from heaven and then just to start shooting flames at these different nations here, per se. Okay, but that fire, we know fire is a destructive force, right? And it can be used to bring a lot of damage. And so when the Lord says here that he's going to send a fire upon a nation, it means that he's going to bring destruction or judgment, right, upon that particular nation. Okay, so here we see here it mentions that they shall die with tumult, right, with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet, which is to signify, being ultimately taken over, right, with by another nation, right, because that tumult and that shouting is a representation of war or battle. Okay, and as it says, with the sound of the trumpet. Now, when it says Moab shall die, obviously Moab is not one person here, right? It's referring to a nation of people. Okay, so that die is not literal per se, but meaning they're going to suffer loss. They're going to suffer that destruction, because we know the Moabites still exist to this day, right? It's the so-called Chinese, mainly. Verse 3, and I will cut off the judge from the midst of thee, and the judge being likened unto the ruler, right? So, i.e. the king in this stead, and will slay all the princes thereof with him, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. So now the attention starts to now drift and focus here on Judah and Israel, okay, i.e. the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, okay, because they were just pretty much doing a great deal of wickedness in the land, right? And then this is going past just idol worship. In fact, when you look around yourself, you look around today, the Israelites today, who majority of them don't even know who they are, or maybe not even majority, because now a lot of people are waking up, but the level of wickedness that they commit, it knows no bounds. Okay, it's like next level creative wickedness, and they were doing the same thing back then, right? So as it says here, because they have despised the law of the Lord Yahweh. So there's a difference between breaking the laws of the Heavenly Father, right, and despising them. All right. Now, and then the example with that is, we're in the flesh. We're not perfect, right? So you might go off, right, without the deliberate intention to do that, right? And yet you commit the act. Maybe you forget on the Sabbath and do something you're not supposed to do, right? That's an example. And if you had cases like that, right, if your nation was full of people who were at least doing their best to uphold and keep those laws, statutes, and commandments, the level of transgression and iniquity would be much, much, much lower than a nation or a majority of people that despise the law of the Lord. And so that word being used here is to emphasize the fact that they could really care less. And because of that, as it says in Ecclesiastes, right, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, the hearts of men is fully set in them to do evil, roughly paraphrasing. So because they could care less about the laws of the Lord, they're pretty much doing whatever comes to their mind, whatever, as the scriptures say, their feet being swift to mischief, right, and they are wise to do evil. They have no restraints. Okay, and that's why the iniquity was pretty much out of pocket without checks. So they despise the law of the Lord Yahweh and have not kept his commandments, and their lies cause them to err, after the which their fathers have walked. So the looking back in the history of Israel, right, all the more reason when you look at the journey from Egypt into the Promised Land, those 40 years, the scriptures tell you, is because the Lord wanted to purge out the wickedness of the old generation. So for 40 years, the Lord had us going round and round and round because you had wicked Israelites in there. And even after that, coming into the land, you would have periods where the Lord will have a certain ruler, right, be it or a judge, right, be it Joshua or whoever else, and they would follow the person for a while, and then when the person died, they would go right back into serving other gods and doing all manner of evil. Okay, so similarly as their forefathers did, you had Israelites doing that in this time. But I will send a fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. And once again, that fire representing judgment. But what's interesting here is that, the Lord actually did send a literal fire upon Jerusalem, right? And this happened some time after by the hands of the Babylonians, okay, or the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteous for silver and the poor for a pair of shoes. Okay, and when you go into this, you had all manner of wickedness going on, but one perspective or example of this would be, not necessarily that you would grab an individual and then sell them for a pair of shoes, but sometimes you had cases where you had certain individuals, though they were righteous or they weren't wicked people, but they just were in a desperate state, right? They were poor or they owed something, right? Be it, as it says here, even silver, or which is money, or shoes, right? And when you're in debt like that, right, the scriptures tell you, right, an individual can sell themselves to pretty much cover their debt if they can't afford it. And they could either be redeemed, or I think it's the year of Jubilee, they would be let go. And the scriptures tell you that you're supposed to treat, if they're an Israelite, you're supposed to treat them not as a slave, but as like a hired servant. Okay, nevertheless, for things that are like a pair of shoes that, they were very valuable, right? Today, people underestimate the value of like shoes because you have them all around. But back then, they were very valuable, or at least pretty valuable to an extent. Nevertheless, here's an example, right? Somebody's not able to afford it, or they owe it, or they borrowed it, or whatever the case is, and they just found themselves in a desperate state. These creditors were unforgiving. Okay, and so you would have cases like this, and I'm sure you also had cases of people being sold literally, right, for money and so on. And they do that today, right? Don't think that human trafficking was not a thing back then, because it definitely was. Verse 7, they pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor, and turn aside the way of the meek. And a man and his father will go in onto the same maid to profane my holy name. Right? So just as it says, right? Now, dealing with the first part, it's a bit clearer in some of these other translations. For example, the NLT, the NIV, right? It says here in the NIV, they trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground, right? As you have the saying to walk all over somebody. So they have absolutely no regard for the poor, for the needy, or even for the laws of the Heavenly Father, because it specifies how you're supposed to treat one another. And just as like it says, they trample on the ground, right? When you walk on dust, you don't, oh, oops, I'm sorry, let me tiptoe. And no, right? That's how they basically treated those that were not as fortunate. As it says, and deny justice to the oppressed. Father and son use the same girl, and so profane my holy name. And as it says, use meaning to have sex with, right? When it says that they will go in onto the same maid, which is wicked. And they lay themselves down upon clothes laid to pledge by every altar. Okay. Now the pledge, right? A pledge is like a security, basically, right? And the scriptures tell you there are certain things that you cannot basically take as a pledge, because if somebody isn't able to, whatever it is that they got from you via that pledge, if they lost it, or it got damaged, or they couldn't return it, or whatever the case is, when it came to the cloak, right, or some of those things that were really needful for a person, you weren't supposed to take those, right? Let me see if I can just find the law on that. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Deuteronomy 24:6. No man shall take the nether or the upper millstone to pledge, for he taketh a man's life to pledge, right? And a millstone, the reason it says that is because it's like today, somebody taking away your stove, and how are you going to cook? How are you going to make food? And the millstone, we know, was used to to grind meal, and that a lot of the common staple was from grain, right? That would be grinded, used as flour, and so on and so forth. And so millstones were very valuable there, and that's why the Lord says you couldn't take that as a pledge. Let me see what else. Okay, so this is one account here. I want to see if I can find the one. Not pledge, the one with the cloak. Let's see. Okay, here's a good one. This is Deuteronomy 24:10. When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge. Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad unto thee. Right? So whatever it is that they're saying, I'll give you this as an exchange. One example is you go to the library. Some libraries, they'll take your ID card, and then, you'll go in, and then when you're leaving, you'll get it back. A pledge is just like a security, right? So as it says here in verse 12, and if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. Okay. Verse 13, in any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment, and bless thee, and it shall be righteous unto thee before the Lord Yahweh thy God. Because that cloak, right, sometimes that was really all people had, and that's what they would sleep with to keep them warm, and so on and so forth. So as it says here, if you had like his raiment or his clothing as a pledge, you were supposed to return him before the sun goes down. Lo and behold, what were the Israelites doing? As it says, they laid themselves down in the clothes laid to pledge by every altar. And when you look at this in some of the other translations, right, it says here, they lie down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. NLT, at their religious festivals, they lounge in clothing their debtors put up as security. So the reason this is being mentioned by Amos is because this was going off, right? So they had no regard for the oppressed, even though they were the ones, the main reasons for their oppression, right, of their own people. So as it says here, and they drink the wine of the condemned in the houses or in the house of their God. And the condemned, when you go into that, it goes into like a fine, right, or a bribe. So here it is. Imagine a judge or a prince or a person in a high position um, judging according to the respect of persons or by being bribed, and then making the wrong call on purpose, and then go ahead and purchasing goods with that and then enjoying that. And as it says, in the house of their God, because clearly, right, remember, we're dealing with Israel here. And the bulk of the northern kingdom, right, as we went into, if we pull up here the timelines, see chronological map, and we go here to, let's find Amos. So we see Amos is over here, right? So Amos comes definitely after the time of King Solomon. And we know that during the time of King Solomon, getting to the latter end of his reign and after, there was a great deal of idolatry that was really pushed in Israel. And so the northern kingdom, primarily because of Jeroboam, were heavy into idolatry. So you can expect that they were serving other gods over there, right? Not necessarily being the Most High Yahweh. All right. So verse 9, yet destroyed I the Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, to emphasize they were very tall. And he was strong as the oaks, yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. And that is a metaphorical way, right, likening them onto like a tree, and the fruits, right, being cut off and destroyed, and likewise the roots, because that's really how you take out that tree, if you uproot it. And so that's what the Lord is saying here, right, that the Amorites that were in this land, when you guys came here, for your sakes, I drove them out. I uprooted them out of here, right, and then gave you the land. Verse 10, also I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up of your sons for prophets, and of your young men for Nazarites. Is it not even thus, O ye children of Israel, saith the Lord? So, am I not speaking the truth here? Is this not what I did for you? And in return, what happened? But ye gave the Nazarites wine to drink, and commanded the prophets, saying, prophesy not, right? They didn't want to hear it. And that Isaiah emphasizes that as well, right? In Isaiah, the 30th chapter, that they say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things. Now, the problem here is that Nazarites weren't supposed to drink wine. Okay. Let's see if I can pull that up here, or even cross-reference it. So, you may think, well, what's wrong with giving wine to somebody if you're not familiar with like the law, right, of the Nazarites, or, when it came to like how the Nazarites were supposed to conduct themselves. But just from context, right, if Amos is speaking here and to highlight the transgressions of Israel, and he mentioned something like this, then there must be a reason why he's mentioning this, right? i.e., this is not good practice. Let's see. All right, so let's just word search Nazarite or Naz. All right. Let's see. All right, verse 20, Numbers 6 and 20. I'm going to read that and maybe jump up a bit. It says, and the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. This is holy for the priest, with the wave breast and the heave shoulder. And after that, the Nazarite may drink wine, i.e. to say, if I can go up a bit more, let's see. Okay. All right. And this is the law of the Nazarite when the days of his separation are fulfilled. Okay, so let's go up a bit more. Here we go. Numbers 6 and 2. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when either a man or a woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord Yahweh, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation, right, the days that they are under that vow, he shall eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. Okay, and then it goes on, so on and so forth. So when you go back to Amos, this is why he's calling it out, because the Nazarites weren't supposed to drink wine while under that vow. And guess what? That's exactly what they were doing. Verse 13, behold, I am pressed under you, as a cart is pressed that is full of sheaves. And you can imagine a cart is like what's the word I'm looking for here? Let me see. I might see it in here. Yes, cart. I'm sure we all know what it is. A wagon. There we go. Like a wagon. And so the Lord is metaphorically saying here, right? Like I'm pressed. Like I feel like a wagon, right? That the sheaf is this. When you bundle up the ears of corn and grain, these are called sheaves. Okay, and sometimes you would saddle these on an ass, or sometimes you would load them in a wagon, and then it would be driven, right? That cart would be driven by oxen or so on. So the Lord is likening this having to deal with Israel as to being burdened or being pressed, like a cart that is full of sheaves. Verse 14, therefore the flight shall perish from the swift, and the strong shall not strengthen his force, neither shall the mighty deliver himself. And that is to say, because of all these things that you guys have done and you continue to do, right, the judgment that I'm going to bring, you're not going to be able to escape, right? The swift among you are not going to be able to flee. That's why it says the flight shall perish from the swift. And the strong among you, your strength is not going to help you, because I'm going to be fighting against you using these other nations. The mighty among you will not be able to deliver themselves. Your armies and all that, they're all going to be weakened. Verse 15, neither shall he stand that handleth the bow, and he that is swift of foot shall not deliver himself. Neither shall he that rideth the horse deliver himself. And he that is courageous among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, saith the Lord Yahweh. And naked doesn't mean butt naked, right, without any clothing, but meaning bare, right? So they would go in more than likely with their armor, with their gear, with their weaponry, right? And you notice when people flee, they're not carrying all these heavy shields and all of them. No, they're trying to be as light as possible and get out of Dodge. And the Lord is using that to emphasize the calamity that is to come, but the helpless state that he would have Israel in when they were to face this as a judgment for their transgressions and for their iniquity. So with that brings us to the end of the book of Amos, the second chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.